Morning, everyone. All right, thank you. All right, my name is Lauren Williams. I'm a senior editor at Defense One, and I'm so excited about our panel on everything AI. And so I don't want to belabor the point because I think we are all familiar with artificial intelligence, but it's become increasingly used across the Defense Department. And we want to talk about what that means for the battles of today and in the future. So I have a great panel set up to talk about this today. And I want to get started with a little bit of news. Within recent weeks, the Pentagon awarded a $200 million contract to OpenAI, which, since I've been covering the space for the past several years, that was not, I think, a thought 10 years ago that would even be a thing. So Katrina, I want to start with you about the significance of this contract and what you're doing to fulfill it.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't give some credit to CDAO for how they are approaching this moment. I think just to sort of zoom out, this is the first time in American history that a technology of this consequence is being developed exclusively by the private sector. If you go back, you look at, electricity or nuclear fusion or the internet or the human genome, at all of the sort of big technological moments in American history, there has been government involvement. Government has been a stakeholder in some way, in a way that they currently are not. Mm-hmm. And what I think what I think government has wrestled with as a consequence of that is how to wrap their heads around what to do with this technology, because it is so general purpose. It really is like electricity, and that, there's so many different applications for it. And so this contract that we have with the Department of Defense through CDAO is really meant to be a partnership where we can really work with the Defense Department, with different military departments, different subcomponents and agencies, to scope and sort of envision how AI could be transformational in entirely different mission areas within the department. And, a big part of it is kind of almost a consulting relationship where we are going to go in and sort of help them think through, applications based on what we know and see the private sector doing that we're not yet seeing in the defense sector. I should also say, I don't think that OpenAI's contract award is going to be the only one they do, and nor should it be. I think that there will be others with other frontier labs, and I really think that that's a wise direction for the Defense Department to be going in. And I want to contrast it with the way the defense sector usually operates with industry, which is to say, like, we have built a bunch of requirements and we need this kind of widget, and now you're gonna submit RFPs to be able to do that sort of thing. What's unique here is that they're sort of coming to us saying, we're not sure yet, and we want your help figuring out what should we be trying to do with this technology, and we're in a really good position to advise on that.
And are you standing up a new office entirely for this? Can you talk a little bit about what goes into that?
Yeah, so we've recently announced we're standing up OpenAI for Government. Mm-hmm. It's going to be an umbrella that sort of organizes a number of different initiatives. We previously announced in January that for the first time we would deploy our model weights inside of U.S. government-owned infrastructure. We did that at Los Alamos in a partnership with 3 of the national labs. And there's other, we have a number of existing relationships with government, with the Air Force Research Lab and other parts of government. And so OpenAI for Government is going to be the federal subsidiary and the place where we really lean into our government work.
And a jump ball for the panel, we're going to continue on this. What does a contract like this mean for defense tech innovation? All of these words, which are thrown around a lot, but we don't necessarily see products of that. So I'm curious of what your thoughts are, Leigh.
I'm going to riff off something Katrina said. I think what's really exciting is that this is going to be first of many. I don't think that this is, the end all be all. I think the government is starting to really look at what do we need to do in this realm with this technology. So I'm super excited about the future there. I think the other thing is that it shows the commitment, right? We are committed to figuring out this technology. We are committed to using this technology. We're committed to advancing this technology. And I don't think it's going to be just one. I think it's going to be one of many.
Yeah. Peter, Troy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just weigh in. I mean, Oracle, of course, has been in the federal government since its founding, 1977. So, we've been part of the fabric for a long time, especially around the data holdings. What's really exciting that we're seeing now is the continued growth and around all of this technology innovations. And we partner with everyone up here on the stage and really helping bring those to do things that will help both the mission and the business systems that we know, the DoD in particular, they have a lot of modernization and a lot of things that need to, be accelerated, and this technology can certainly help there.
Yeah.
I think it's a great testament to the unlock that's happening with this technology to see this contract. I think, just taking a step back, we just got, a new directive as well to open the aperture to acquire more software acquisition pathways. So in some ways, we've, as the DoD national security space, have been good at procuring things. I think that whole digital age is still to bear. And, we got to think about what are all the undergirding things to make AI successful. It's the software workflows. It's the data sets themselves. And so I just think we're, at the beginning, a precipice of a cataclysmic change here in terms of the types of technologies being procured, not just AI, but, sort of everything in between that and the physical structures.
Because you're mentioning acquisition, I'm curious, just frankly, how is the software acquisition pathway working? I feel like we hear about it being touted, at least from defense officials, as like a really good thing. But from your perspective, does it actually make it easier to do business with DoD?
So the acquisition vehicle's there, whether or not people are using it to its full extent and know and see the value and impact. I think to bring it to a personal example, we're working in the shipyards and the depots inside of the supply chain for the manufacturers. Things are still being done with pen and paper, right? And human ingenuity that, has persisted over, many generations. And so I think, no, that hasn't taken hold. But I'm optimistic that now there is a support to do it, and there are early adopters of this. And I think people are starting to see what is the value of having a digital twin, allowing for these simulated environments that you can model and have that trade space, and just really starting to understand what is the value of digitizing our assets as early as we can, so that we can make more informed decisions and have that trade space.
Yeah.
Can I double click on that
Yep.
for a second? Because I'm really optimistic about the future. Acquisition is one piece of what it takes to get this technology into the mission's hands. And there's a lot of attention right now, not only on the acquisition side, but looking at the accreditation side and what's going on with, how we maybe need to reevaluate how we accredit this technology and get this technology in the mission hands. So I think there's a lot of focus on how do we go faster, right? And so we may not exactly see the impact of that yet, but it's definitely top of mind for officials on getting this technology in the mission's hands as fast as possible.
Yeah, and if I could just weigh in, one of the interesting things we're seeing is the acquisition aperture has opened up certainly for more rapid acquisition of these types of technologies, which is great. On the other side, though, is the entire planning cycle about how they're going to fund those acquisitions, which we think still has some opportunities to speed up that process potentially, especially within the DoD, where they have very long cycles where they're thinking about 2, 5, 10 years out, and they're planning large expenditures for that. So when new technology rapidly rises like this, and you have to suddenly go and acquire that because it's important for both your business and mission systems, we do see like there is a little bit of a lag there between the acquisition now and where those planning cycles have been. So, and I know there's a lot of really smart folks thinking through that, but that is something that we are seeing currently.
Yeah. I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about how you think or how you see AI changing warfare now, currently, in current current conflicts, but also where could it be in the future, and then what is needed to actually bridge the reality to science fiction.
Who do you want to go first?
I can't see Peter, so I'm gonna just pick on Peter.
Oh, I wasn't hiding, I swear. No.
I have so much to say.
It's really awkward. So, the nature of, AI in particular has been used and continues to be used for like kind of different parts of, we consider that type of cycle. We're certainly seeing with current conflicts how it's helping aid a smaller force against a larger force. And I think one of the key areas where we see AI and really machine learning and that whole umbrella around AI having huge impact is really around kind of the intelligence, the sensing, the making understanding of what your current, systems and your landscape looks like. There's a number of really, really good examples on that where we see, currently AI is helping assist that. And there's been some good output from, say, the Maven program and others like that we see that. In terms of where it's headed, I mean, if you believe some of the headlines that are out there, we're looking at, much more low-cost, fast-moving assets within an environment, within a war field. And those assets are small, they're inexpensive, they may be 3D printed or whatever, and they have to be, controlled somehow through some sort of automation, likely through some sort of AI. And so I think future is where that is potentially heading, because we've, in current conflicts, this is in the news, like we've seen that has been quite successful in helping a smaller force against a larger force. So I think that's where we're gonna see some of the future assets heading.
Yeah. I'm really, really excited for kind of this technology and where it's going. So it's about faster decision-making, better decision-making, and resiliency. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things people think about AI as, the model, right? And the results of the model, but it's a technology stack, right? There's a lot of things that are needed in order to deliver AI to the mission. Mm-hmm. So there's, a network, there's the chipset and the infrastructure, there's the first-party models, and there's the ecosystem around it, right? The developer tools, the agents, the things that you need to do to build a mission application on top of it. And so, there's large companies like Google that play in all aspects of that stack. There are small companies that play in, different aspects of that stack, but you need it all, and you need to be able to plug and play it all and have commercial capabilities for it all. And so I think the government and the department recognizes this, and we're seeing more and more kind of focus on resiliency across the stack and how are we gonna go after the problem in all aspects of it, not just the first party models.
How are you getting after the challenge of having this sort of compute and storage power at the edge?
Yeah, so everybody up here has a different technology to address the edge, yes. Right? So Google's not the only one. Yes. Google took a very deliberate approach to the edge, and instead of taking our commercial cloud compute power and trying to minimize, shrink it to get to the edge, we actually built an edge component from the ground up, thinking through what does the edge require, kind of not thinking about the enterprise for a while and thinking about the edge and then coming back to the enterprise. And so what I mean by that is we have a very scalable, small form factor to larger form factor edge solution that's built on Kubernetes and open source from the ground up, thinking about the edge rather than taking our commercial platform and trying to minimize it. I spent 30 years in the defense industrial base, and the edge was always a problem. You'd build things at the enterprise and you'd try to take them to the edge, and it never worked, right? So I'm super excited about building something for the edge and then taking it to the enterprise, because that's a kind of a different mindset and a different technology that you need to deploy when you're thinking about an area with degraded comms or whatever it may be.
Yeah. I want to ask Katrina and Troy, I want to ask about your specific perspectives on this. Can you, Troy, go ahead.
I think we're talking about a lot of great technology. It's the sort of the pointy end of the spear, right? And I think autonomy for speed of decision making, efficiency. There's system trust that's built into that. I think where we're actually deploying both autonomy and AI today is actually sort of prior to the assets being sort of deployed and operational. And so what I mean by that is right now things like our aircraft and our ships are not ready, right? We're way below our surge capacity readiness that we desire. This is the CNO's #1 priority. But how we're leveraging autonomy and AI is to deploy technologies prior to a ship or a submarine coming into a dry dock facility so that we have an understanding of, okay, what's the material health of this asset? How do we make targeted, efficient repairs so that we can get that asset back in the fight? We're deploying autonomy and robotics as well in the supply chains, way upstream of the shipyards even. So how do we get forging and castings produced more efficiently? To understand, again, are there any material defects? If there are, how do we repurpose that component so that it can still move along the supply chain? Because we are talking millions of dollars being lost when that part has to get scrapped, and months to years of delay on something like a Columbia-class submarine being produced. And so I think, just again, sort of in the duller, maybe less sexy parts of what powers our military, we need to build ships faster, we need to build airframes faster, and we need to maintain the ones that we have better. And that's a, real today application. And, so I think, we're super optimistic about proliferating that as well, across to the kind of pointy end of the spear.
Yeah.
I don't have a huge amount to add. I think that the expertise of what you've already heard kind of captures the bulk of it. I think what I would say is that OpenAI is laser focused on being a foundation model developer and being the leading foundation model developer. And one of the things that as I think about OpenAI for government and how we're going to engage, there are going to be some things that OpenAI leans into doing directly, but there's going to be a huge number of things that our technology becomes foundational with partners and how they build things that are actually fit for bespoke purposes. And when I think about the edge, I actually think about I think that there's going to be a layer that emerges of really exceptional technologies that are really fit for specific purposes, and I think that you're going to see models like OpenAI's and the ones that Google DeepMind is producing be used in those, but I really think that there's gonna have to be a lot of creativity in how we do this. It's not gonna be one way. It's not gonna be a uniform application. It's gonna be very dependent on the use case and very dependent on the trade-offs that you're willing to make and not willing to make.
Mm-hmm.
So, I sort of share the optimism. I think there's a lot of really exciting things that are gonna happen, but one of the things that we also, we're talking in this conversation, at where we want to be and not necessarily where we are.
Yeah.
Like when I think about where we are, I think about a very big gap that currently exists between between sort of what the people who are building and working with the technology every day think is possible and what is actually happening inside of government with the people who are already serving. And, one of the things I always say is that you don't get fit by reading about working out, and you don't get good at understanding this technology as wonderful as it is by listening to a panel on it. You have to use it. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, and that's where, the best ideas are going to come from. We are going to have really great insights about how this technology can transform defense missions. But the actual most brilliant ideas that I think are going to emerge from the men and women who serve. And the only way that those ideas are going to surface is by getting the technology into the hands of those men and women, which right now they don't have. And so I think there's tremendous urgency behind that, because that is where some of the biggest innovations are going to come from. It's not actually going to be from industry.
Yeah. I want to pick up on the creativity part, because I think that that's really important. And at least as I cover the space, the creativity absolutely exists at the individual level. Mm-hmm. I had the opportunity to go aboard a destroyer and talk to the crew, and they were telling me how they were, using radars, but they are using them also as like a telescope. That's not necessarily like how this particular one was supposed to be used, but I'm like, that's creative, but that's not necessarily something that every, destroyer crew is going to use. So how do you inject that sort of ingenuity into a system, into an organization, like, because that's what's going to be required to actually use AI at scale on different levels?
Well, I'll give one answer, and then I'm curious what my panelists have to say. We have a lot of experience seeing how the private sector is successful at adopting this technology, and there's a couple of themes that are worth noting. Number one, the biggest predictor in how successful AI adoption will be in an organization is actually how much the C-suite uses it, which I think is really interesting. And what it means is that, I always talk to my, team at OpenAI about how, like, I am an old lady who likes birds, and I am the person that has to be like, I am the caricature of the person in government that we're trying to get to sort of understand and harness this technology. I'm like the latest adopter of technology you can imagine. I still have the oldest iPhone that can possibly be used on the system, that kind of thing. But we know that top down really matters. And we also know that bottom up really matters. So you have to have a strategy for both. You have to get the technology in the hands of the people who are going to use it. And you're going to find, you've got to create communities of interest, and you've got to elevate, the flowers that are blooming and that have the most potential. But then you have to identify the 3 to 5 things that are really core to your mission that you absolutely have, if you could transform them, would really change the way that you do things. And you have to, that's where you sort of build on top of API, and that's where you build bespoke solutions. But it's really got to be the top down and the bottom up. But I'm curious what others think.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly share what we're seeing, because we have a number of generative AI and AI agents and other things that we're deploying. I mean, I think the point of this new wave in AI is how accessible it is to folks who are non-technical. And as an engineer, I'm guilty of having built some fairly complex systems in the past that may or may not be still, working in dark corners of the government that, I apologize right now for, that probably very difficult to work with, just me personally. But, what we've seen is this technology has exploded in the commercial space. And I personally believe that it is due to how accessible it is. And it feels almost very human when you're interacting with it. It's not sentient, never will be, et cetera. But it is it is a much more human way of interacting with the system. And I think that's what's driving the adoption. So for the opportunity here for us in defense in this important mission is to really harness that in a way that, allows our soldiers, our airmen and so forth, a system that they can interact with and get rapid insights into in a very natural and human way. And I think, it was a great point. The more you use it and the more you can understand it, the faster that technology will be adopted and the more value you'll see being created from it.
Yeah, I think we can't make it too hard. Just get it in people's hands, right? We were talking about MacGyver in the speaker room, right? Creativity comes when there's scarcity and you got to figure something out. Creativity comes when there's a mission need, like the telescope, and you have to figure it out.
Yeah.
And it comes when you just get your hands on, you start using it. I had my daughter is in college, and I was talking to her. She was studying for a language exam, and she's like, "Mom, I'm going to plug this stuff into AI, and I'm going to have it write a test for me that I can then take." Right? I never wouldn't even think of that, right? So you just got to start using it, and I think the creativity happens. And so my personal urgency is just get it in people's hands, and then who knows what the limits are.
Yeah.
What are the stakes for the Pentagon to not get this right? Like what is?
Well, I mean, I think all of our adversaries are doing it, right? So,
but AI is not new though. So
but yeah, I mean, in a little bit, like we were talking about, earlier on this panel, talking about kind of the mission impact of it, which is really important, right? Faster decision making, better decision making, unlocking data silos, all the things that we talk about with AI, right? But there's also an importance that we need to think about is all the back office kinds of things that it can do as well, right? Yeah. To save money, to get us more efficient so that we have more money to pour into the mission that we need to accomplish, right? And so I think that, the stakes are high and we have to go after this. And I think the department knows it, and it's, evidenced by the contracts that they're letting and the urgency that they feel. But I mean, we haven't even like talked about cyber, but you know, the only way to kind of continually go after the cyber problem is through AI. I feel very strongly about that. So.
I think we've talked about the adversarial threats of getting, falling behind, or, some of the security, and the trust in the system. To me, the thing that has to be right is the foundational data sets. And I think, just building on the structured data that we have in the models today, and the foundational models today, they're largely built off the internet, what can be observed there. When we think about, this world of what's happening on the factory floor, what's happening inside of our, power generation systems, a lot of times the data doesn't exist, or it's not structured in a way that can be observed and sort of put into the models. And so, if you have garbage in or nothing in, you get that out. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we see. And, I think there's some anecdotes to that, of course, but it is a real challenge to not getting that correct, because the folks that, deal in the world of atoms will lose, they don't trust their enterprises, they don't trust their software, it hasn't changed their world. And so they rely on their, cognitive abilities largely. And so I just think like there's a big trust barrier to get over when we talks about sort of the world of atoms. But I think there's things being done today to build that trust, and it's just something we should all be, knowledgeable about.
Pulling the thread on trust a little bit, one of the things that really disturbed me was an Edelman survey that came out about 3 months ago now, that was on, it was a global study of trust in AI. And when you looked at the level of trust in AI in the United States and in the Western world, it was in the low 30%. And when you looked at trust in AI in China and in the rest of the developing world, it was in the high 70s. And that delta is huge on a survey of that type. And what it means is that we could actually win on the technology side. We could win the race to AGI, and we could lose on adoption. And I've been at OpenAI for a year and a half, which means that I've been at OpenAI for longer than 2/3 of its employees, which is like an interesting fact. I'm considered OG in the OpenAI world. And in that time, in the first year that I spent at OpenAI, I spent all day, every day talking to the US government and governments around the world about this technology. And when I would talk to the US and the UK and the Western world, I would spend about 80% of my time talking about risk and like 10 to 15% talking about adoption. And everywhere else I went, it was the inverse of that. And I would say, I don't know what the right balance is. We certainly need to talk about risk, and I'm not advocating for that not being a big part of the discussion. I don't know that that's the right balance. And I'm encouraged because I'm starting to see a shift there. Mm-hmm. In the last 6 months, I've really started to see a lot more conversation about, how do we harness this? What does it look like to get it right? What does it look like to get it wrong? And in it feel, I think the biggest risk that exists right now is the risk of doing things the way we've always done them. Like that is actually a very big risk that we are undervaluing relative to the risk of trying something new and taking on something that maybe we don't fully understand yet.
Yeah. What I would say is what the Department of Defense needs to do is pivot from, there's a lot of POCs and MVPs, like things out there, and really pivot to having it an enterprise function, an enterprise motion. Whether you're looking for, like the panel before us, fraud, waste, and abuse within the financials, or you're trying to achieve clean audit, or you're trying to understand and profile like what your workforce planning is needed, to anything on the industrial side. I think it's a must adopt rapidly, or risk falling behind and not being able to solve some of the problems or the challenges that we're seeing today. I mean, you brought up a great point around, there's a huge backlog right now for the defense industrial base to produce the various components that makes the Department of Defense run. Usually when I go to one of these companies, and apologies if you're in the room, but the way that they're thinking about how do they fill that backlog, I'm a data guy, so it's like, where's your data? And they're like, well, we got Phil over here, and he knows everything about this process. And you're like, okay, well, that's great for fill, but like, how are we going to we have to extract that, and we have to then use that in order to speed up that manufacturing process. And I see a lot of those pockets as well in the DoD. And so I think this is a must adopt rapidly with the appropriate controls and risk and so forth. But I do think that is where the DoD needs to head.
Well, to pull on this, I mean, how are you getting after the fills of the world? Because I feel like fill is integral to integration. So how are you convincing, how are you getting that institutional knowledge? And also marrying the technology so that it can be adopted more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, so for us, and partnering actually with folks up on the stage around this, it's all about the data. Like, Phil knows that what's going on, he knows where everything is, but then how do you then, quantify that? How do you pull that into a system? How do you then be able to create the full view and then do that in a repeatable, automated way? It's the same thing in DoD as well. Like, just take financials. There's 30 plus financial systems that run the current DoD, and being able to do audits and, cleanly and be able to satisfy the auditors and so forth, it's a very complex human and manual process. So anywhere where we can take data and then you allow for the automation, for the AI and other things to help enable to make that much more accurate, as well as to do it faster, I think those are where the opportunities are.
We have about 375 people in Gecko, and we're a robotics and AI company. And 50% or greater are engineers. About 80% of those engineers are embedded at customer sites. And so that's how we get access to Phil. That's how we enable Phil to do Phil's job better, by putting information in front of them and then sort of partnering. Because the reality is the answer lies somewhere in between the robotic and the AI and Phil. And there's sort of a marrying up of those two worlds that can only happen by sort of breaking down those barriers and getting very close and proximal to the customer. So I think, that's one example. I think the other thing, just to build on a point that Katrina was making, was, and I've seen this shift over the last 10 years too, which is, we are not going to outcompete our adversaries, right? China has 230 times the shipbuilding capacity that we do. Many folks have way more of the human labor than we do. And so how do we outcompete? We outcompete through technology, and that will be the secret to being competitive. But I think, I had a lot of pushback, just like the trust in the AI, on robotics taking jobs and robotics sort of being this replacement of human labor. The reality is it's not that case, right? The folks want to be able to use the tools that they can use on their cell phone, right? Like, why does my personal life look like I have all this technology around me and my workplace doesn't? And so now I want the smart tools. I want the smart robotics. I want the intelligent sensors. I want the data analytics that I can do, and run my, you just get a much more creative workplace, and it's an inspiring workplace to be. And then we don't fall victim to, the wave of retirements that may happen and leave us with gaps, or the folks that come in early entrants and make the silly mistakes early in their career because now there's safeguards with, technology enabling them.
Yeah, one more. I mean, I feel bad for Phil. We've been talking about Phil. I don't know where he is in the organization, but just to pull a thread on, the Phil conversation and what Katrina said and what you were talking about, Troy. If we talk about this technology and try to apply it to how we've always done things, we're not going to get the adoption, and it's not going to work. So we have to just get it in people's hands so that they can think about doing their work differently. And I think that's the way, people like mythical Phil, is unlocked, right? And the data is unlocked if we think about our processes and how we go after it differently. And that's going to take, the C-suite and that leadership culture and that change.
Part of what the thing I wish that people knew when they were thinking about, I think that the fear of being replaced by AI is real. And I especially think it's more real, sort of the older you are. I feel like younger people are less afraid of it. They're more, they're starting to grow up with it. The thing I wish people understood is that the biggest thing that AI is already doing for people who are using it is toil reduction. It is making the things you don't like about your job, it's outsourcing that. And it's making, I use AI every day, even though I am an old lady who likes birds. And the things that I do are actually the things that I like to do more, and that only I can do. And I'm really leveraging AI to reduce the toil in my daily life and my daily job. And I feel like if you think about what it is like for the men and women who serve, and where the toil is in their daily workflow, or the toil of a cybersecurity analyst, for example, you can take these jobs that are pretty grueling especially at the earlier stages, and take out the pieces that people really don't enjoy, and free them up to do things that only humans can do, and that are in many ways the things that we all find most engaging and most inspiring about our workplaces.
I want to take our last few minutes to talk about the allies part. We've talked a lot about AI and algorithms. Where does this fit in terms of U.S. allies and partnerships? I know when we talk about technology exchanges with allies and partners, the U.S. is usually platforms, the F-35, et cetera. But where does this sort of soft technology fit into that?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, this gets us to data sharing faster, right? And it gets us to secure data sharing faster. The ability to not have to share a platform and share a result, right? And share the results securely. I know we only have 3 minutes, so I'll pass it on. But I think it's, it actually accelerates the ability to work with our coalition and our allies and our partners. Yeah. It's not a hindrance.
Yeah, 100% agree. And that's where the critical need really is that rapid insight development on one side, but then the sharing with our partners, as quickly as possible as world events unfold. That's really key. And of course, AI and security right in the middle of that.
And so we'll wrap up with a kind of rapid fire round of what can we expect next from each of you? And you can get big, you can get fanciful with it if you want to,
I'll be super simple, rapid fire. We got to get AI in the mission's hands at the edge as fast as possible, so people can just.
And how? I'll push on that. How are you going to do that in the next 6 to 18 months?
Yeah. So we have. I alluded to kind of that edge technology that we have. We are working on putting our models on that edge technology in a disconnected environment, so that, and we're going to exercises as we speak, so that mission can use it. Yeah.
And Katrina, you have a new office and everything. So can you walk us through what your plans are, or what OpenAI's plans are?
I mean, one of the things that our CEO, Sam Altman, has said, and that I'm looking forward to, is the release of an open source model that is coming, this summer. I think that, it's really important for the developers who are experimenting and who aren't going to be the ones who are leveraging, the frontier technology necessarily, but are building and experimenting. We need them to build on US models. I mean, that is just really important. And so I think that the open source model is going to enable a lot for defense innovation. I think it's going to enable a lot for partnership. And, I think as I look ahead, I'm really excited about just making it more available.
Yeah, so 2 things for Oracle: large-scale AI infrastructure for training and inference, which is what we've been doing in our cloud with OpenAI, with Stargate and other things, but focused in defense. And second is data estate modernization, helping government to really use their data. And we didn't get into this as much, but use their data for AI to make it much more accurate, trustworthy.
I forgot one thing that's really important.
Okay.
One of the things that is going to be happening in the next 6 months, because it's already begun, is that we have actually deployed our model inside of the Los Alamos system that I was describing earlier. And one of the things that I'm really excited about that they are focused on doing is accelerating the future of science. And that has a direct tie into what we're talking about with the defense sector. Like, when we start to see the acceleration of science, especially in classified domains, it's going to open up, new possibilities and new advantages for the United States and our allies that I think are really, really important.
Troy closes.
Yeah, we have a lot of partners at, with the U.S. Navy and the Air Force and their suppliers, and we're excited about the evolution of those, and we'll have some pretty large announcements here soon. But I think for us, it's how do we build things more quickly? How do we maintain things more efficiently? How do we make assets last longer? And a lot of what we haven't talked about necessarily on the stage, but we need more energy. Energy undergirds all of that.
Yeah.
And Gecko is deploying solutions to help produce 5% heat rate improvements in our thermal facilities, and that can increase our gigawatt production by 10 gigawatts without building a brand new power plant, right? So there's so much efficiencies, whether it be on the getting more power out of the existing asset, or decarbonization that goes hand in hand with that. I'm just really excited about just maximizing the infrastructure we have today. We're going to need it.
Yeah. Well, Troy, Peter, Katrina, Leigh, thank you so much for being here. And you all, thank you for being here as well.